Okay, welcome everybody. Chef Durfee here in my home kitchen. I'm going to demonstrate today the technique for making a pretty classic sponge cake we call biscuit Joconde or Joconde sponge. It's an almond cake and it gets used for both decorative purposes and then also just because it's a delicious cake. So I'm going to walk you through the procedure. We're going to make the cake start to finish all the way through. And I'm actually going to start by showing a pretty common technique that we would use for making what we're going to call a stencil sponge. Right? And so that's when we're going to use the Joconde sponge as a decorative addition to maybe to spread very thin and bake. Cut a thin ribbon from it and wrap it around the inside of an entremet ring. And so here's how the process begins. So I'm just going to do this as a concept, but we're not going to actually bake the cake that way. I've made some tulip paste. Okay? The recipe for the tulip paste and the Joconde sponge are included in the recipe manual just right down below this segment on the Moodle page. So this is just a blend of confectioner's sugar, egg whites, butter, and pastry flour. And I'm going to add a couple of drops of coloring to it just so you can see it work better. And so I just blend that in. Sometimes we'll add cocoa powder to this mixture. So you see, it's very, very soft. We use this for making, cone cookies and lots of other things. It's just regular tulip paste. Okay? So I'll take a small amount of this. And I'm gonna, at school, we would have something that's a stencil. We'd spread a little of this batter through. There's my dog, okay? And we're gonna just take a little bit of the batter, because I don't have a stencil actually handy right now, and we're just gonna spread it thin on the Silpat mat, just to kind of give you an idea of how this would work. So I spread it thin here, and then I'm just gonna use a serrated cake knife here to kind of give you an idea. So I spread some batter and now I'm going to go like this and make a pattern. Okay. And if we were using a stencil, we would have like maybe some polka dots on here or some stripes or something like that. I can actually use my fingers to kind of make little patterns inside as well. So all these are just typical ways that we prepare a Silpat mat with a little bit of a pattern, and then we're going to take this tray, we're going to put it into the freezer, and then the batter will freeze solid. So then we take the soft Joconde sponge after it's made, put it over the top, and then this pattern will bake into the cake so that when we see it from the outside, from like the bottom side up, we'll see that the pattern that's baked into the sponge cake. So I'm just going to set this aside right now so we can get on to making the cake. This needs to go into the freezer and freeze solid. It's always the first step of making the stencil sponge is to prepare the Silpat mat with a stencil. Okay, so the ingredients, the components that go into this cake, it's a separated foaming method cake, which means that we're going to start by actually, in this case, taking whole eggs and we're going to whip them with sugar. So in the typical Joconde sponge recipe, right, we actually use confectioner's sugar and we're going to blend it right up with almonds, right? So this is sifted almond flour, sifted confectioner's sugar. We're going to combine it with eggs. And we're going to whip it on high speed for about 10 minutes. Some recipes ask you to add eggs like half and half. I'm going to take the almond flour. Remember, it's almond flour, it's ground almonds. There's no gluten development opportunity here. And sifted confectioner's sugar. Right? We're going to put, I've got 4 eggs. I'm going to put it on the mixer. And we're going to whip it on high speed. I'll be honest, I generally just dump in all the eggs. Right? And this is like a separated foam, so it's cold foaming here. We're not warming it up. We're just going to whip this until it becomes very thick and holds a ribbon. It takes about 10 minutes. So after it starts to blend, I will add the rest of my eggs. And we're going to whip it until it's thick and holds a ribbon. That'll take about 10 minutes. Okay, we've been whipping for about 10 minutes. If you take a look, this is very thick, right? Holding little ribbon there. Okay, the eggs are done. We'll set that aside here. Okay. The next step, this is a separated foam, is we're going to whip some egg whites. So this is 6 whole eggs plus 6 egg whites. Right? When we make the meringue here, we've got to be careful that we don't over whip the egg whites and make them dry. So the process is whip them on a medium speed, right, until they're frothy and opaque, and then they will look like the foam in the head of a beer when you pour beer into a glass. And when it's frothy and opaque, then and only then do we start adding our sugar. I've also taken the egg whites out of the refrigerator a long time ago, so they're at room temperature right now. So I'm on speed 6 out of 10 right here. I'm going to get these frothy and opaque, and then we'll gradually add our sugar. I've got a little bit of melted butter here on the side and a small amount of pastry flour that we're going to add to this recipe after the meringue is ready. Okay, this egg whites are ready. They're frothy and opaque. They look like the foam on the head of a beer. I can start adding my sugar right now, and I'm going to add it gradually like a gentle spring rain. Don't dump it all in there at once. A meringue, we want to be very careful how we build a meringue so that we get the benefits of volume and stability. So that's medium speed, whipping the egg whites at a room temperature until they're frothy and opaque, and then gradually adding the sugar bit by bit. Okay. And when the meringue starts to, you see traces of the whip inside the bowl, you can start adding the rest of the sugar. I want to be careful that I don't over whip it and make it dry. Egg whites are they're prima donnas, right? They want to be used like immediately. So when the meringue is ready, we're going to use it like right away, right? I don't want to stop it. It looks really nice. It's getting fluffy and thick right now. I don't want it to be too full. I can turn the speed up a little bit. Okay, and these egg whites are beautiful. So, show what we're looking like. Okay, they're holding a soft peak. Okay, we want to make sure that our egg whites are just at this stage. Anything more than this, it's going to be difficult for them to be folded into the cake batter. Okay, so here's the process. I've got my whipped eggs. Okay? I'm actually going to transfer it to a different bowl just to make it easier for you to see. And I'm actually just did that. I'm going to take a little bit of that back. I'm going to reserve a small portion of the whipped eggs here on the side. Right? A small portion. And we're going to take the melted butter. We're going to blend it in with that bit of the batter. I'm going to set that on the side. It's like you might do with the Genoise sponge. Okay, so I've got the butter ready to go. All right, I'm going to take the meringue, I blend that in with the whipped eggs. Fold that in carefully. And when it's most of the way folded in, not all the way, but most of the way, I can add my flour. There's a small amount of flour in the recipe. Right. Flour has been sifted already. Okay. Fold the flour in carefully. And when the flour is most of the way folded in, I can temper in my butter. It's almost all the way folded in. And so I will add in the butter. So this batch size is typically spread in a full-size sheet pan, in which case it would be very, very thin. Right? And we would bake it quick, fast oven, 400 degrees or so. And then once it came out of the oven, we would cut it into thin strips, and we use it to wrap around the inside of an entremet ring, right? So I like that idea, but I'm not going to do that right now just because I don't need that. And actually, I like this cake so much, it's really just delicious. I want to bake it thicker. So I'm going to pour the whole amount of batter into a half sheet pan that I prepared earlier. And then when I bake it, I can use it as just a component layer inside of a cake. So I'm going to grab my prepared sheet pan from the freezer. All right, I finished this up earlier. Okay, and again, if I wanted to use it for this type of application, where I was going to cut a strip and wrap it around the inside, it would be so much more effective if I did a full sheet pan and spread the whole batter over a full-size sheet pan. So I'm going to be pouring it in here, so it's going to be too thick to use for that application, right? So I like to use Joconde sponge as a component in the cake more than just for the decorative purposes, because I think it's so delicious and it doesn't really get all the time the respect that it deserves for just being a really tasty cake. So we'll spread the batter. Remember that since we've been so careful to whip the eggs into here, we don't want to deflate it. So we'll spread it carefully. Try not to turn my body, but turn the pan instead. Wow, it's already so thick and fluffy. All right, if I was going to bake a full sheet, I would go in the oven probably around 400 degrees because it's a little bit thinner. I'm going to go in at 375. It's going to bake in about 15 minutes. We'll see you in about 15 minutes. Okay, when the cake comes out of the oven, this has been a little bit more than 15 minutes, to tell you the truth. It has a nice golden brown. It's light golden brown. And when you touch it on the top, it springs back. Okay, perfect. So we're going to let this cool off completely, and then we'll flip it over to show you the pattern on the other side. Okay, the cake has had plenty of time to cool now. I'm going to take just a little bit of confectioner sugar because the top of it is just a little bit sticky. So we're going to just brush a little bit of confectioner sugar over the top. That way we can make it just a little bit drier. Okay. All right, I'm going to take a piece of parchment paper. I'm sorry, I'm going to get a knife. I'm going to trim around the edge. Okay, I'm going to take a piece of parchment paper, set it across the top, and I'm going to put this tray on the top of it so we can flip it over carefully. All right, and we'll peel the Silpat mat off and be really careful so you can see the pattern. How cool is that? All right, so remember, if we really were going to use this as a ribbon sponge inside of a ring mold, we would be spreading this half the thickness. But as it is right now, this cake, which I probably wouldn't put the stencil on at all, we would be used for a layer inside of an entremet, whether it's the sheet cake style or one that's going to be built in a ring. It's delicious and it has a great texture because it is made by the separated foaming method. It does have the ability to wrap, so you can roll it up or you can wrap it around the inside of the cake, but even on its own, it's really, really good. All right.